Welcome to the Crazy Alchemist podcast, where alchemy, occultism, and strange history come alive.
In July or August of 210 BCE, somewhere in the flatlands of what is now Hebei province, the most powerful man in the world died in a carriage. He was 49 years old. He had unified China, standardized its script, built the first version of the Great Wall, and commanded an empire of roughly 40 million people. His name was Ying Zhang, and history remembers him as Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. The chancellor, Li Si, panicked. They were 2 months' travel from the capital. If news of the death spread, the empire could fracture overnight. So Li Si sealed the carriage and told the entourage to keep moving. When the corpse began to rot in the summer heat, he loaded 120 kilograms of salted fish into the carriage to mask the smell. For 2 months, the dead emperor traveled across his own empire in a cloud of brine and decay, his officials still presenting food and documents to the curtained carriage as if he were alive inside. He almost certainly died of mercury poisoning. He had been swallowing mercury pills for years, prepared by his court alchemists, men who promised him eternal life. The pills were made from cinnabar, a blood-red mineral that transforms into liquid silver when heated. The alchemists believed this transformation held the secret to immortality. The emperor believed them. He was the first Chinese ruler to die this way. Over the next 1945 years, at least 10 more would follow. Ying Zhang became king of the state of Qin at age 13. By 221 BCE, at age 38, he had conquered 6 rival kingdoms and created the first unified Chinese state. The title he chose for himself tells you everything about his ambition. He combined 2 words that had never been joined before, Huang, referring to the mythical 3 sovereigns, and Di, referring to the 5 emperors. He was Huangdi, first August emperor. The title implied he was the equal of gods. The unification was real. He standardized Chinese script so that bureaucrats across the empire could read each other's documents. He standardized weights, measures, and axle widths so that carts could use the same roads. He built a network of highways and canals. He connected existing border walls into a single defensive line that became the ancestor of the Great Wall. He abolished feudalism, replacing hereditary lords with appointed administrators who answered directly to the throne. All of it was accomplished through brute force, centralized control, and a governing philosophy called legalism, which held that human nature was fundamentally selfish and could only be managed through strict laws and harsh punishments. 3 assassination attempts survived. The most famous involved a man named Jin Kai, who hid a poisoned dagger inside a rolled-up map and tried to stab the emperor during an audience in 227 BCE. Jin Kai missed. The emperor drew his sword and cut him down. After that, the paranoia deepened. He slept in a different room every night. He changed his travel plans without warning. Somewhere in the middle of all this, he became obsessed with not dying. The men who promised him immortality were called Fangshi, a word that translates roughly as masters of methods. They were specialists in alchemy, astrology, divination, exorcism, and what we might loosely call medicine. They occupied a position between court advisor and traveling magician, and they had been part of Chinese intellectual life for centuries. The Fangshi were not peasant charlatans. They came from the Shi class, the traditional scholar administrators, and their knowledge often overlapped with genuine expertise in herbal medicine, metallurgy, and astronomy. Joseph Neidan, the Cambridge historian who spent decades documenting Chinese science, traced the origins of organized Taoism to an alliance between Fangshi, shamans, and philosophers in the tradition of Laozi and Zhuangzi. When Qin Shi Huang unified China, Fangshi from the conquered states of Qi and Yan rushed to his court. They had a product to sell, the elixir of eternal life. The emperor was buying. The elixirs they prepared were based on cinnabar. When roasted, cinnabar produces liquid mercury, the only metal that flows at room temperature. When that mercury is recombined with sulfur and heated again, it becomes cinnabar once more. A blood-red stone becomes a flowing silver liquid, then becomes a blood-red stone again. To the Fangshi, this reversible transformation was proof that the boundary between states of being could be crossed and recrossed. If a mineral could die and be reborn, so could a man. The emperor swallowed the pills. They contained cinnabar, lead powder, and sometimes arsenic compounds. Modern toxicology has a clear assessment of what happens when you consume these substances daily for years. Your hands begin to tremble, your gums bleed, you become irritable, paranoid, prone to sudden rages and equally sudden withdrawals. Your cognitive function declines, your kidneys and liver fail. You die, usually between 40 and 55. Qin Shi Huang died at 49. The elixirs were not his only strategy. He also sent expeditions to find the source of immortality directly. Chinese mythology described 3 sacred islands in the Eastern Sea, Penglai, Fengzang, and Yingzhu. These islands were the dwelling places of immortals who lived among pine trees, cranes, and tortoises, all symbols of longevity. Nobody had found them. The Fangshi said they could. The most ambitious Fangshi was Su Fu. In 219 BCE, he petitioned the emperor directly. He told him that the islands of the Immortals existed and that a legendary 1,000-year-old magician named Qi Shang lived there, waiting to share the elixir. All Su Fu needed was a fleet. The emperor gave him one. Su Fu sailed with 3,000 virgin boys and 3,000 virgin girls, a crew of soldiers and craftsmen, 60 large ships, and enough supplies to sustain them at sea for months. It was the largest maritime expedition of the ancient world. He sailed for years. He found nothing. In 210 BCE, the same year the emperor died, Su Fu convinced the court to let him try again. He claimed a giant sea creature had blocked the path. The emperor sent archers to kill it. They found and killed a giant fish. Su Fu loaded his fleet again and sailed east. He never returned. Sima Qian, the Han Dynasty historian who recorded the story a century later, wrote that Su Fu arrived at a place with flat plains and wide swamps and proclaimed himself king. He did not say where. Over 1,000 years later, the monk Yi Chu wrote that Su Fu had landed in Japan. Today, Su Fu is worshipped at shrines across Japan as the god of farming, the god of medicine, and the god of silk. Construction of the tomb began in 246 BCE, the year Yingzang became king at age 13. It continued for 38 years, employing 700,000 laborers. The complex covers approximately 56 square kilometers. The mound itself was originally 76 meters tall, a truncated pyramid visible from kilometers away. The sealed underground palace measures roughly 100 by 75 meters with a maximum depth of 37 meters below the surface. According to Sima Qian, the interior contained replicas of palaces and government offices, rare objects and vessels, and a ceiling painted with the constellations. The floor held Mercury rivers representing the Yellow River, the Yangtze, and the seas, constructed in such a way that they seemed to flow. For 2,000 years, this description was treated as literary exaggeration. It is not. In 1983, researchers published the results of soil sampling over the tomb mound. Mercury concentrations reached 1,440 parts per billion at the center, against a background level of roughly 30 ppb. The distribution was not random. the highest readings clustered in the northeast and south, matching the locations of the Yellow River and Yangtze in the actual geography of China. A 2020 LIDAR study published in Scientific Reports estimated the tomb has been continuously leaking mercury vapor for over 2,200 years. The total mercury loss to the atmosphere so far, approximately 1 ton. The total still inside, possibly up to 100 tons. The tomb has never been opened. The terracotta warrior's paint curls within 15 seconds and flakes off within 4 minutes when exposed to dry air, and whatever is inside the burial chamber would face the same fate. No technology exists for safely excavating a space that may hold 100 tons of mercury. As of 2026, there are no plans to open it. On March 29, 1974, a farmer named Yang Zifa was digging a well with his brothers during a drought. A few meters down, his shovel struck a terracotta head. The scale of what lay underground was beyond anything anyone had expected. Current estimates put the total at more than 8,000 terracotta soldiers, 130 chariots with 520 horses, and 150 cavalry horses arranged in battle formation across 3 pits. Each figure is life-sized. Each face is distinct. No 2 are identical. Only about a third of the 3 pits has been excavated in the 50 years since discovery. 6,000 figures remain underground. In 213 BCE, the emperor's chancellor Li Si proposed a radical measure to unify thought across the empire. Anyone who failed to burn banned books within 30 days would be tattooed and sent to build the Great Wall. Books on medicine, divination, agriculture, and forestry were spared. The imperial library retained copies, but most of those copies were destroyed 7 years later when the rebel leader Xiang Yu burned the palaces of Xiang in 206 BCE. The books survived the emperor's bonfire. They did not survive the civil war that followed his death. Chinese alchemy divided into 2 branches. The older branch, Waidan, or external elixir, involved heating minerals in sealed crucibles to produce pills that would grant immortality when swallowed. The younger branch, Neidan, or internal elixir, replaced the crucible with the human body and the minerals with breath, essence, and spirit. Waidan killed emperors. Neidan replaced it. The foundational text of Waidan is the Cantong Qi, attributed to Wei Boyang in the mid-2nd century CE. It is the earliest known book on alchemy in China. The most detailed practical manual is the Bao Puzi, written by Ge Hong around 320 CE. He listed 56 chemical preparations, 8 of which he acknowledged were poisonous. His most ambitious procedure was the 9 times refined Cinnabar, heating cinnabar to extract mercury, recombining it with sulfur to form cinnabar again, and repeating this cycle 9 times. Each cycle was believed to increase the substance's spiritual potency. The logic was coherent within its own framework. Cinnabar was red, the color of blood, fire, and life. It transformed into mercury, a silver liquid that seemed alive. And the transformation was reversible. The cinnabar could die and be reborn. If a mineral could pass through death and return, the alchemist reasoned, so could the person who consumed it. The reasoning was wrong. The chemistry was real. The emperor died in 210 BCE. The last Chinese ruler known to die from elixir poisoning was the Yongzheng emperor, who died in 1735 CE. Between those 2 deaths, at least 9 other emperors were killed by the same pursuit. The worst period was the Tang dynasty, when 6 emperors died from elixir consumption. Emperor Xingzong began employing a court alchemist named Liu Mi in 818. When advisors suggested making Liu eat his own concoction for a year first, the emperor refused. He died 2 years later. His son Muzong succeeded him and died 4 years later from the same cause. Muzong's son Jingzong followed and died 3 years after that. The most revealing detail is what happened between each death. The new emperor would execute the alchemists who had killed his predecessor. Then he would hire new alchemists. Then he would swallow their pills. The young Zhang emperor, the last victim, died in 1735 while reading court documents. His successor responded by evicting every Taoist priest from the palace. No Chinese emperor consumed alchemical elixirs after that. The tradition lasted nearly 2 millennia. The logic never changed. The results never changed either. The strangest part of the Cinnabar story is not what happened in China. It is that the same substance with the same sacred status appears on 4 continents among civilizations that had no contact with each other. In 1994, archaeologist Fanny Lopez Jimenez was stabilizing the stairs of Temple 13 at Palenque, Mexico, when she noticed a crack. Behind it was a limestone sarcophagus. The skeleton inside, every object in the tomb, and the interior of the sarcophagus itself were covered in a thick layer of bright red cinnabar powder. She became known as the Red Queen. DNA analysis eventually identified her as Lady Ixtzakbu Ajao, wife of the great Maya king Akal. In April 2015, liquid mercury was discovered at Teotihuacan, the vast Mexican city predating the Aztecs. The mercury was found in pools at the end of a 100-meter tunnel beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, sealed for nearly 1,800 years. The tunnel walls had been infused with powdered pyrite, so the mercury pools would have reflected light like stars. In Rome, Pliny the Elder describes cinnabar as a substance of great importance. Workers in cinnabar workshops wore loose masks of bladder skin to avoid breathing the dust. The face of the statue of Jupiter Capitolinus was painted with cinnabar on holidays. The Almaden mine in Spain, the largest mercury deposit on Earth, shipped 10,000 pounds of cinnabar to Rome each year under seal. Between 1566 and 1593, 24% of the convicts working the mine died before their release, almost all from mercury poisoning. In India, the tradition of Rasa Shastra treats mercury as parada, the seed of Lord Shiva. Mercury-based medicines are still produced and sold today. A 2008 study published in JAMA found that over 20% of Ayurvedic medicines sold online contained detectable levels of lead, mercury, or arsenic. 4 civilizations, 1 substance, the same sacred status. China, Mesoamerica, Rome, and India all independently arrived at the conclusion that this red stone holds power over life and death. There is one more detail about mercury that mattered to the alchemists, and it may be the strangest piece of the entire story. Mercury preserves corpses. A body saturated with mercury resists decomposition. The chemicals that kill the living also inhibit the bacteria that consume the dead. When an alchemist who had been swallowing cinnabar pills for years died, his body often did not decay. For the people who found these bodies, the conclusion was obvious. The alchemist had succeeded. He had become a Xian, an immortal. This created a feedback loop that sustained the tradition for almost 2,000 years. The very evidence that the elixir was poison, an undecomposed corpse, was interpreted as evidence that the elixir was working. Every death confirmed the method. Every preserved body recruited new believers. Lady Dai, a Han Dynasty noblewoman who died shortly after 168 BCE, was found in the 1970s so perfectly preserved that her skin was still elastic and her joints still flexible. Her blood still contained hemoglobin. Analysis revealed high concentrations of mercury and lead. She was the best preserved ancient body ever found. She was also, in all probability, killed by the same substances that preserved her. The alchemists who failed to make immortality pills accidentally made something else. In 808 CE, a Taoist text recorded a cautionary note about a specific combination of ingredients, saltpeter, sulfur, and carbon. When mixed and heated, flames erupt, burning people's hands and faces and setting houses ablaze. The alchemists were trying to make an elixir. They made gunpowder. The Chinese word for gunpowder is hu yao. It translates as fire medicine. Qin Shi Huang's tomb sits under a hill in Xi'an, sealed for 2,200 years. Mercury vapor still leaks from its surface. The rivers of quicksilver may still be flowing inside, fed by a slow chemical reaction that has outlasted every dynasty the emperor feared would replace his own. The emperor wanted to live forever. He built a tomb that has lasted longer than any empire in Chinese history. The pills that killed him may have preserved his body in the same way they preserved Lady Di's. He may be in there, intact, surrounded by flowing mercury, under a ceiling of painted stars. Nobody knows. The tomb is closed. The mercury is still there. The rivers may still flow. And the question of what the Fangshi actually knew, whether the tradition that killed 11 emperors was pure delusion or contained some genuine understanding of transformation that we have not yet recovered, remains as open as the day the first alchemist heated the first piece of cinnabar and watched it bleed silver. If you enjoyed this, subscribe and leave a comment. We put out new content every week, covering the strange places where history, alchemy, and mythology meet. Thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to visit crazyalchemist.com for more intriguing content and follow Crazy Alchemist on Instagram and Facebook to stay connected.